Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar about making eRecords more findable. I'm Emily Sumner, and I work with Marchive to help facilitate this webinar. Before we begin, I'm going to review just a few quick housekeeping items to help the webinar run smoothly for you. We welcome your questions, and we encourage you to send them in as they come up for you throughout the presentation. We'll be holding a Q&A period at the end of the webinar. To send a question, you just use the questions feature in your control panel. You'll type your question into the top box and click send. I'll receive your question and I'll put it into the queue to be answered again during that Q&A period at the end of the webinar. If you experience any technical difficulties during the presentation, you can use that same questions feature to get my attention, and I'll do my best to resolve the problem for you. One thing you can do right now to try to help things go smoothly and prevent audio and video lags is to close all of the programs on your computer and shut down your internet browsers. Just leave GoToWebinar open, and that'll ensure that all of your computer bandwidth and internet bandwidth are going to power GoToWebinar. If you do have problems, such again as video and audio lags that just don't seem to smooth out after a few seconds, you can try closing GoToWebinar and coming back in, and that can sometimes reset the connection for you. We're going to be sharing a few links and other information with you throughout the webinar today, and I'm going to send those to you through chat, and that'll pop up on your control panel. And you'll get a notification of that again on the control panel. This chat is just one way, so you're not able to chat with other people on the webinar. And again, if you need to get my attention, you can use that questions feature. After the webinar, we'll send you a recording as well as the slide deck. There's a lot of information that we're going to go through, and there's a lot of words on these slides because we're giving you many cataloging examples. So don't feel like you need to write all these down or take screenshots. We'll send you that slide deck so you'll have it to reference along with the recording. You'll also get a certificate of attendance in that email, so keep an eye on your inbox tomorrow for details on how to access all of those materials. All right, let's get started. I'm pleased to welcome today's presenters, Ligia Gomez and Ray Schmidt, and both can join me on screen now. It's great to see you both. Welcome. Ligia joined Marchive in 2013, where she consults with libraries about authorities processing, RDA conversion, GPO cataloging, metadata conversion, MARC record enrichment, and reclassification. She received her master's in library science from University of North Texas. We also are really happy to have Ray Schmidt here with us today, and he works in library and technology services at Wellesley College in Massachusetts and has been there since 2008. He is currently the Assistant Director for Discovery Services, which comprises cataloging, acquisitions, e-resource management, library systems, and resource sharing. Ray specializes in music cataloging and served as chair of the Authorities Subcommittee of the Music Library Association's Bibliographic Control Committee from 2014 to 2016. So we're really excited to have both Ligia and Ray with us today and to dive into the world of eRecords. So I think, Ligia, are you ready to kick us off?
Yeah, I'll get started. Okay, so thank you so much, Emily, for that nice introduction, and greetings, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today. Today in this webinar, we're gonna get to know each other, review common problems with eRecords, learn how Wellesley College is handling eRecords, learn automated ways of cleaning up eRecords, and lastly, we're gonna answer some questions. Okay, so let's get started off with a poll. How many of you have recently budgeted for or have redirected funding for more electronic resources? So we're going to put a poll up on the screen, and we're going to give everyone about 30 seconds to go ahead and answer. All right, so is everyone checking the box?
Yep, we'll give it just maybe 3 more seconds. Looks like folks are slowing down on the voting. All right, let's take a look.
Okay, wow. Yeah, that's actually a lot higher than I thought it was going to be. So you can see that a large percentage of you are purchasing ebooks. So next slide. I wanted to share with you this ALA survey as well. They put out a survey regarding what libraries are doing due to COVID-19. You can find this in the link provided in the chat. It showed that due to COVID-19, many libraries have reopening plans at limited capacities, new sanitization practices, and a focus on online resources to limit face-to-face interaction. So that poll that we just took really showed that as well. With that, there is a push to purchase more ebooks and other online resources. This image shows that physical materials are still in high demand. However, patrons may not have the capability to browse the shelves in your area. The online catalog is more important than ever. See the quote in the lower right-hand corner. I know it's small and hard to read. She mentions how having accelerated reader program was important for her teachers in her area to find age-appropriate online resources. Marchive adds accelerated reader and Lexile to the MARC record when matched to a title for only $26 with every database remediation project. This content can be indexed in your system and a patron can search by reading level. This ALA survey got us thinking about the questions we get all the time regarding ebook vendors. Next slide. Here are some vendors that libraries work with. We're not going to call out any vendor specifically in this webinar, but we get questions about vendor records a lot, so that's why this webinar is important. Over the years, we have learned a few reasons as to why the vendor records may not be top-notch. A little disclaimer before I say what I'm about to say. I'm not saying that all vendors do this or even the ones pictured do this, but these are the methods that we have learned. So one is the records are often data mined without access to the item. You will see some examples in this presentation where knowing this tidbit explains some of the reasons why these records look like this. Two, another way they're created is by bots or by people whose first language isn't English. It's a hard truth that American catalogers are pricey and that their records become unique work that can't be redistributed in most cases. Using bots and workers in underdeveloped countries is less expensive and allows vendors to redistribute the records. Lastly, the records are not stored in MARC. They are stored in a software with its own computer language like HTML. Then as libraries make purchases, a subset of the records of the vendor's entire collection, is pulled out and converted to MARC. This conversion brings its own set of problems. But because of the way they are stored, Marchive cannot work with vendors directly to clean the records before a library would receive their particular batch. Therefore, the way these records are being created will naturally cause problems for your library's catalogers who are accustomed to cataloging in MARC using AACR2 and RDA cataloging rules. Now I pass this presentation along to Ray Schmidt, who will go over things to consider before sending records to a vendor like Marchive for cleanup.
Thank you, Lihia. Okay, I'm here to talk about factors to consider as you incorporate eResource catalog records into your authority's processing. The context for this is that as library collections have shifted from printed books and journals to online access, library catalogs have become much different animals. What's different? First of all, the titles in ebook, eJournal, and eMedia collections can number in the thousands or tens of thousands. This means, of course, that to add records for these titles to the catalog, we must rely on external sources, either vendors of catalog records or the publishers themselves. Now, publishers of eResource collections realize that it's a selling point to be able to say that they directly provide MARC records for their collections, and indeed, such records can help to trigger demand-driven acquisitions. But cataloging isn't the main business of these companies, and as Lihia pointed out, the quality of the records can vary quite a bit. For some ebook collections, records where the catalog records are frequently derived from those for printed books cataloged by the Library of Congress and other libraries, the fullness of the records and adherence to standards can be quite high. Unfortunately, records for many collections can be lacking in description and subject headings, or the access points for personal and corporate names are not the preferred LC forms, and this creates inconsistencies in the catalog. The other significant aspect of eResource collections is that they're somewhat volatile. Things were more straightforward when the catalog simply reflected the books that were on the shelf. Some might go missing from time to time, but publishers didn't come to libraries to yank hundreds of books off the shelves. but with eResources, it is not unusual for large numbers of titles to be made no longer available due to changes in licensing. Besides this, libraries often decide to change the profile for demand-driven acquisitions collections if the costs are becoming too high, or they might choose a different collection entirely if a better option becomes available. All of this translates into a lot of records being deleted from the catalog. The next slide, please. The challenge then is about the budget, about using funds wisely to reap the benefits of authorities processing whenever possible, but while balancing that against spending the time and money on records that will soon be deleted, or on records that are so minimal that essentially nothing is gained by having them processed. For some collections, the number of records might be so great that submitting them for processing all at once might not be feasible, but you may be able to spread this out over time. So you need to ask yourself, what is the degree of certainty that the records will be kept in the catalog for a reasonable length of time? And it's up to you to decide really what a reasonable length of time is. Does the number of records in a given collection fit within the budget? And what is the overall quality of the cataloging for a particular collection? Next slide. At Wellesley College, thinking in these terms, we have chosen to send permanently owned collections like 18th century collections online, even though it is a rather sizable collection. JSTOR purchased an open access ebooks and archived GPO records. We also have a subset of titles in our eBook Central collection that are purchased, but they're part of a larger eBook Central DDA collection, so we have not bothered to separate out the purchased titles to send those records for processing. Next slide. On the other hand, we don't send out records in collections where the number of monthly deletes is high, mainly DDA and EBA collections, eBook Central and JSTOR, DocuSeek, Films on Demand, and Canopy. I will mention that when we first began our JSTOR DDA program, the number of records was relatively small and the quality overall was high, and it seemed worth sending these out for authorities processing as well. But the additions to this collection became very rapid and it expanded very quickly, and we eventually decided not to send records for authorities processing anymore. The take home there is that you do need to continue to monitor your collections and how they change, and sometimes rethink decisions about whether or not to send something out for authorities processing. We also don't send out our serial solutions records because they are frequently overlaid in monthly updates. And yeah, next slide is fine. Which is my final point, is about updates to records. For eResources that have frequent updates to catalog records, at least some of the benefits of authorities processing are lost when the records are overlaid. You can choose to live without authorities processing, which is what we do with serial solutions. Or depending on your system, you can try to protect specific MARC fields or create a record loading profile that addresses this problem. That might be something to do, for example, if the only thing being changed in the updated records is a URL. Or you could allow the overlays to happen and resubmit the records for authorities processing later, which is something we do with our GPO records. To sum up, just as libraries need to assess whether to add record sets to the catalog in the first place, it is important to be strategic about which sets to send for authorities processing. Back to you, Leah.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ray. Before I begin, I want to give a special thanks to the Troublesome Catalogers and Magical Metadata Fairies Facebook group, as they inspired some of the examples detailed in this presentation. I also want to note that there will be a lot of examples in MARC. So this part of the presentation is unfortunately very text heavy. There's going to be a lot of MARC coding in the next few examples. We'll be posting this on our website, and any of you can ask me to send the webinar to your email. Please do not be frantically writing the examples provided. Next slide. Now we're going to talk about the types of errors. Here are a few examples of issues that arise in vendor records. The ones listed here are issues MarChive cannot address as we do not have the items in hand. My personal favorite is the table of contents with just chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. So when I talk about what we do, what we can do, note that we're not stating that we're going to output records that look like they were cataloged by a human. We have to make this statement so everyone can set a correct expectation in regards to our work. Okay, next slide. So what can MarChive fix? MarChive can fix a lot. Note that many of the fixes I will explain are not limited to eRecords. We also apply most of this to all bibliographic records. I also want to note that since MarChive works with all MARC-based integrated library systems, it cannot share how a specific change will impact how the record is viewed in your OPAC, or how it will specifically affect searches for your patrons. Even libraries with identical integrated library systems index their records differently. Libraries that have purchased discovery layers can also have their searches impacted for the better. However, in my opinion, when it comes to record cleanup, you can't overdo it. We need services like MarChive, discovery layers, record enhancers like table of contents and summaries, and most importantly, catalogers to review and create the cleanest records possible. Catalogers are also necessary to review the records with the human eye to ensure the best records for your patrons. Next slide. We see the issue of inverted names a lot. Because we help so many libraries, we see so many of the same records over and over again. There are a couple ways we go about fixing an issue. The first being we try to compare the name to an authorized form. Secondly, we have created a fix file for inverted names like the example shown. We find these ourselves and also have our partner libraries report them to us. In this example, the library had a discovery layer that still directed me to this correct artist, even though there was an inverted names, but it still displayed the inverted name in the search results. As a Sonic Youth fan, I found this just to be a silly mistake, but I'm sure your library directors are not so happy with these types of things showing up in the catalog. As shown in these examples, we fix next slide, sorry. As shown in these examples, we fix incorrectly formatted corporate names, recording artist, etc., and retag the main entry to the correct MARC coding. So I just want to leave this on here for a little bit before I go to the next slide. Okay, next. The word "the" seems to be tripped up in some records. Our programming also includes artist names that should not be separated by the word "the." So instead of Beatles, comma, the, it is fixed to the Beatles. Next slide. Sometimes vendor records for online resources have several main entries in the 100 field when they should be parsed out into separate fields. Next slide. There are cases when MarChive can correctly parse out the records by matching to an authority record as shown here. You can also see we added identifiers in the subfield 0. This is a profile option that we do not charge extra for. Next slide. Here is an example of two different authors in the library's catalog. MarChive compares the name to an authority record to validate the name. Then this author can be correctly linked to an authority record within your system. Correctly linking to an authority record helps your system group the records of a particular author together. Next slide. To the left is a list of possible matches for this author, as seen in this slide. Adding the date is a visual cue that helps patrons find the author they are looking for. MarChive service will add this when possible. Next slide. Here are some examples of how we authorize undifferentiated names. We have heard that we make matches that seem to be impossible as we don't have the item in hand. The titles we use for determining which name to match are particularly found using the Virtual International Authority File, or VIAF for short. Also, again, we see a lot of the same records over and over again. We have created a huge fixed file for records to help us correctly match an authority record to validate the name. Next slide. It is common to see incorrectly tagged personal names and corporate names. MARCHIVE matches to the name in an authority record and corrects the MARC tag as needed. As you see here, the Rolling Stones MARC tag was changed to the 710 second indicator 2. Next slide. We confirm the language codes to ensure the filing indicator is correct. Here you can see the second indicators were corrected. Libraries use these language codes to add filters in their catalog so the patron can find appropriate foreign language materials. Next slide. We have seen issues with the MARC tag 490 having the first indicator of 0. The new way to create the 490 is with the first indicator of 1 and to generate the 830 field. MARCHIVE will do this as part of our standard processing. This is the correct way to form the MARC record so patrons can accurately search for series. Next slide. Here are more examples regarding the 490 and 830 tags. The 490 tag is a series statement on the resource, and the 830 is the authorized form. Oftentimes, the series statement in the authorized field 830 is identical to what's in the descriptive field 490. Other times, the authorized form is different. MARCHIVE will update the authorized field if the authority record has a series statement in it. Next slide. The 650 field is for what the item is about, and the 655 field is the genre form, which is describing what the item is. This is sometimes incorrectly cataloged with genre terms coded as subject headings. Libraries may request that the 650 field with no other alpha subfields be matched against genre authority records in their authority control profile. If recognized, they will be re-tagged as a 655. Okay. Next slide. We saw complaints of odd abbreviations within records. There is no way to program for all possible abbreviations, but we do fix quite a few abbreviations. Earlier in my slides, I had an example of a strange abbreviation in the title. We do not change abbreviations in the title because there is no way to really program for that. The abbreviation changes noted here are not part of RDA conversion. They are common abbreviation terms found in Library of Congress records and subject headings. All right, next slide. If the library chooses RDA conversion, we can also update abbreviations to full words and convert Latin to English. All of the examples shown are a small snippet of what we do. We would be here for weeks if I were to address every possible scenario. I will provide this document to anyone that requests more information, and it will also be found on our website. As part of RDA conversion, we can add content media carrier fields or CMC fields when missing. We do not check CMC fields that were already present in the record for correctness. I'm going to go through these slides rather quickly because they all show the CMC being added into different types of records. Again, these slides will be made available on our website. The first slide here shows what we did for streaming video. Next. This next slide shows streaming audio. Next. This next slide shows an ebook. Next. Next slide shows an online database. Next. This slide shows an online journal. Next. The final example regarding CMC fields is an online score. Next. Marchive can do a variety of special programming to meet your needs, so don't hesitate to ask. Next, I will show some examples of custom work we can do. Additional charges may apply. Here we are able to change the 300 fields to the correct cataloging. This is helpful as your catalog likely uses that code for filtering online resources from print. Next slide. Here we were able to change the 008 to show this item was an online resources and not a microfilm. We would have to review your data before committing to this work or recommending it to your library. Again, this is going to be used for filtering what resources your library has. Next slide. If desired, we can check the 750 and 755 tags against authority records and retag them as subjects or genre in the 650 or 655 tags. We would only move the 750 tag to the 650 and the 755 tags to the 655. This may be helpful depending on how you are indexing subjects and genre. Next slide. In closing, I could go on and on regarding what Marchive can do to standardize and improve your library's records. The best way to see our work is to ask for a free sample. Your library would send 1,000 bibliographic records for us to process, and we would return the processed records along with the quote and proposal. You can just shoot me an email when you're ready. I also like to give a special thanks to Ray Schmidt for helping us out in this presentation. It's always good to get a library's perspective. Now I pass the presentation back to Emily Sumner.
Thank you, Leah and Ray. That was a lot of information. As Leah said, we will be sending you the PowerPoint deck. You can also reach out to her personally, and she'll be happy to send it to you and answer any questions that you may have, or take her up on that great offer to get that free analysis and see what Marchive can really do with the records that you have in your catalog, the e-records that you have. So as many of you probably remember, we did ask if there were any questions before we started this webinar when you registered. And so we're going to take a couple of those that came in, and then we'll take some of the questions that have come in during the presentation. We've got time, so feel free to send in more questions and we'll get to them. So we will dive in. All right, so our first question is, do 6xx's really need to include things like downloadable audiobook or overdrive or ebook?
I would say that using format instead, like using fixed field codes like type of record or form, may be more effective for limiting searches and collocating by format. So the 6xx fields aren't really necessary, but a number of libraries still use these terms in 6xx fields if they consider them useful, maybe especially if it's for a less typical format. The trouble is that different record sets may or may not include these terms in their MARC records, and so it's a real problem to try and decide, and you need to look and see whether you want to, whether it's feasible to either strip out or make sure the same terms are added in all the collections across the board, or you may just end up having to live with the inconsistencies.
Right.
And you know, in regards to Marchive, that's not a question for us. We just validate what's already there in the 600 field. So.
All right, thanks for that. Next question, how can we prevent so many records from not overlaying TMP records correctly?
Okay, so we, you know, here at Marchive, I do get that question a lot, and that's not a service that we offer, and that should really be directed towards the vendor that you're getting the records from, or perhaps your ILS vendor. Do you have anything to add, Ray? Or
No, it sounds more like that's something about the systems and the work, your library system and the workflows. I think that when records like bib records go out to Marchive and they come back pretty immediately, there's nothing that's going to change that would make them not overlay. So I think it might just be something about the way the system is set up.
Right, without knowing more information, we can't really answer that question. So.
All right, and sorry there, I had a little, I think, dip in my own internet bandwidth, so I've turned my webcam off momentarily. Sorry about that. Sorry to leave you alone. But our next question is, what kind of support, and Lihia, this is for you, what kind of support do you provide for consortial records or accounts?
Okay, so there's a couple. I mean, it really depends what service you're looking for. We provide consortial accounts for our GPO records. So usually, you know, at the consortium level, they load it into a shared system, and there's discounts for that. And then for authorities processing, it's the same thing. There's a discount of that's a bulk tier for a consortium, and then it goes into usually a shared system, but we can talk about it more if it's all standalone systems.
Okay, and that's a great question for whomever asked it to, you know, reach out to Marchive and dive into that topic a little bit deeper with them. Okay, so question maybe for both of you, I'm not sure. We just purchased 2 databases from ProQuest. Do I need to try to put them in our online catalog?
I'll try and answer that. I think it depends. Usually when we have a new database, if they're offering MARC records for it, I would take a look at them and see. It depends on what's in the database. Sometimes these are just newspaper clippings or something where you really don't gain a lot of benefit from, you don't necessarily want a catalog record for each little item. So if it's acting more like a database, you don't necessarily need the records. But if they're more like, if it's more like a database that has significant items or book collections or something like that, I would probably strongly consider adding them to the catalog.
Yeah, and I don't have anything to add for that.
Okay, all righty, no problem. Lihia, this one definitely is for you. This is someone who's working with Marchive, and when they send e-book records in, they get names such as Patterson James on an undifferentiated report. Is this because you couldn't verify the correct authority for this title, or because there wasn't enough information in the record, or would you need to look at that to find out?
Well, we would have to look at it to find out. But I mean, even this webinar that I gave had a James Patterson example in it. So yeah, it's just there wasn't enough information to definitely make that determination within the record. But yeah, just send it over to your technical contact and maybe we can add it or tell you why we weren't able to do a match.
Perfect. And again, yeah, if you have your technical services contact, reach out to that person. Otherwise, Lihia's information is there on the screen for you, and she'll be happy to help. All right, this is the last question that we've got in, but if folks have other ones, feel free to send them in and we'll get to them. We've, again, got some time. But in this cleanup process, how are the records delivered back to the library to import into the catalog?
They're sent via FTP. So yeah, you would just pick up the records online.
Okay, excellent. Well, I'm going to try to turn on my webcam to see if we can go out all together. So thank you, Ray and Lihia, both for sharing your knowledge and expertise with us today. This was really interesting and helpful. And again, thanks to everyone who joined us online today for the program. You will get an email tomorrow that has the recording and that slide deck with all of those great examples from Lihia. And it will also include her contact information. So if you've got more questions, feel free to reach out. And again, take Marchive up on that great offer to do the analysis of your eRecords and see how those turn out and how they might benefit your catalog and your patrons. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you back on a future webinar. Have a great evening, and
Bye,
we'll see you soon.
Thank you.